Readers on, cameras off. In this video, I've got the cameras off just because I'm going to be reading. And so here we go. In this video, I'm going to be talking about why I supported Pierre Poilievre, why Canada, in my opinion, is incredibly fortunate to have Mark Carney, how Pierre and the Canada First movement substantially appear to not be Canada First, and how, at the very least, many of the bigger Canadian conservative commentators on YouTube are really just rage farming, clickbaiting, partisan whores. Why I supported Pierre and opposed Trudeau. Pierre was the first Canadian politician that I ever really liked, my favorite Canadian politician of all time. I'm a political moderate who could not stand the one-sided, intolerant victimhood culture of the social justice left. I used to be on the left, and they repelled me right out of it. I couldn't stand their infantilization of everyone who wasn't a straight white male. My view was that they tended to treat straight white males as being somewhere between callous human and malevolent demigod, and people in marginalized groups as if they were somewhere between human and house pet. And before anyone in this crowd wants to simply write me off as some privileged straight white male, know that I'm a biracial son of a single mother refugee from Africa who spent 2/3 of my childhood in rented, unflattering Scarborough apartments. As someone who values intellectual rigor and freedom of speech and inquiry, I did not like the intolerant culture that the social justice left had created when it came to exploring various complex social issues. Justin Trudeau constantly pandered to this movement. During a time when many people walked on eggshells on these issues, Pierre Poilievre did not. He was never in any way bigoted, but he wasn't a doormat to the mama bear culture of intersectionality. Overwhelmingly compassionate to her perceived children, culturally ruthless to anyone who contradicted her narratives. And this had real consequences in Canada. Prior to Trudeau, there was already an affordability problem in many parts of Canada, thanks to Trudeau and in part to an immigration policy so overzealous that even during his own administration's final months, they came to admit that they went overboard. This contributed to the affordability crisis. And you ran the risk of being called a bigot if you simply said something along the lines of that there is such a thing as too much of a good thing. Yes, Canada absolutely needs and is enriched by immigrants, but that does not mean you overflow the tub. Too many immigrants, too fast, runs various risks, like driving up the cost of housing by having more demand for housing than the market can produce new ones, increasing congestion, and creating ethnic enclaves with which bidirectional tensions develop between them, other enclaves, and the broader society. It is not racist to point this out. Take it from the son of a refugee who himself immigrated to the US for 11 years before recently returning. What is more, it is quite possibly the case that there is no one in Canadian history more privileged than Justin Trudeau, if indeed he doesn't hold that title all to himself. He really was essentially a less qualified Canadian lefty equivalent to George W. Bush. Like Bush, he was underqualified for the job, got to the head of his party largely because of who his dad was, and got votes by pandering to a sizable animated cultural fringe. For Bush, it was the religious right, and for Trudeau, it was the identity politics left. Though one could actually and legitimately say that Bush was the more qualified of the two. He was the owner of the Texas Rangers baseball team. He held the position of governor of Texas. He studied at Harvard and Yale. Now, yeah, of course he got those positions and placements because of who his dad is, but he had them. By contrast, Pierre is the adopted son of a middle-class set of teachers. He is also well-spoken, quick-witted. He celebrated Canadian culture rather than, like Justin, saying that we didn't have one. And he called out Liberal government scandals. Like you, conservative Canadians, I believed that there are people within Trudeau's government who should probably be thoroughly investigated and possibly prosecuted. And to this day, I remain open-minded to this. Another thing I really resented was how Trudeau's Liberal cabinet had a weekend's worth of meetings at a Quebec Fairmont hotel just shortly before his resignation, renting out the entire facility for days, just to have meetings. How was this necessary? Why would they need to go to this Quebec 5-star resort when they can talk in the Parliament buildings? That's literally what the Parliament buildings are for. Parliament, from the French word parler, literally means to talk. In a country that was having an affordability crisis and having its economy further threatened by Trump, this was nothing short of reckless. Another thing that I didn't approve of with respect to Trudeau was what I perceived to be overblown COVID draconianism, including but not limited to vaccine mandates for truckers. I myself have received the vaccine 4 times. A friend of mine actually called me a COVID pioneer because I was the first person he knew to get COVID and the first person he knew to get the vaccine. I'm a healthcare worker, and so I was able to get it before everyone else. I got it the second day I possibly could have. I am not anti-vax, but I'm anti-mandate on civil libertarian grounds. Relatedly, I oppose people who referred to people who were anti-COVID vaccine mandate as having been anti-vax. Firstly, being anti-mandate does not mean anti-vax. Secondly, the COVID vaccine was different from, say, the flu vaccine on a multitude of fronts. First of all, the technology the vaccine was based on, at least some of the bigger ones, was mRNA, which was a new type of vaccine. Second, these vaccines were, for good reason and understandable reason, rushed. So new vaccine technology rushed. This gives people legitimate reasons for a level of skepticism about them that they would not have for, say, the flu shot or the MMR vaccines. But I had mixed feelings on the trucker protests. On the one hand, I was on their side on anti-mandate grounds. I was also gratified to see Canadians standing up for themselves. For a long time, I thought that Americans were better at standing up for themselves than Canadians were, by and large, with our famous politeness. It was nice to see Canadians show their backbones. But, on the other hand, if BLM had been blocking ports of entry and honking their horns incessantly, I'd have wanted the book thrown at them. So I had mixed feelings, and by the way, I withdraw all previous comments and views that Americans are any better at Canadians than Canadians at standing up for themselves. This past year proves that unmistakably they don't, by and large, have any perched position on this matter. So that gives you a sense of where I was coming from. Why I started moving toward Mark Carney prior to the election. In the wake of Trump's annexation threats and the lead up to the election, I was actually Canada first. For all of my misgivings with Trudeau, and there were many, I thought his speech the morning in early March when the tariffs would be enforced was good. In the weeks leading up to the election, on a series of occasions, I made Facebook posts telling people that while I will be voting for Pierre, Carney is a legitimately good option, and that Canada is lucky to have 2 good options, as opposed to the US, which often struggles to come up with one. I made posts saying that I like Pierre and why, but I also made posts saying what made Carney a strong candidate. For Carney, the biggest things were his maximally pertinent background. This is a guy who studied political economy at both Harvard and Oxford, earning his way into both. He wasn't a legacy or wealth-based admission to either school. He subsequently got hired into and worked his way up the chains at Goldman Sachs and Brookfield Asset Management. In addition to this top-tier private sector finance and economics background, he was also the first non-Brit to hold the position of Governor of the Bank of England in over 100 years, helping steer them through Brexit. And before that, he was the governor of the Bank of Canada under the Harper government, helping the Canadian government weather the subprime mortgage crisis of 2008 better than most countries. If you were to create a person for the moment that Canada currently faces in a lab, they would look a lot like Mark Carney. As I was explaining the strengths of Carney, I wasn't just talking other people into Carney. I was talking myself into him, but not fast enough. As I was in the US, I could vote early, and I voted for the Conservatives. Though at the time, I felt like I couldn't really lose. If Carney won, I felt like that would be fine and good, and I would root for him to succeed. About a week before the election came, I came to regret the vote. I liked Pierre a lot, and I was very open to voting for him again once all this stuff blows over. But my feeling was that right now, Carney needs to win. He's definitely the best person for the current moment. And I didn't want to reward the Liberal Party, but I didn't want to cut off my nose to spite my face, even though I did by voting the other way, and I came to regret it. And so, needless to say, I was happy when Carney won. And I was also happy with Pierre's concession speech. My hope going forward was that Pierre and the Conservatives would truly function as the loyal opposition. But I'm not naive. I get that as the opposing party, you have a perverse incentive. If you work too closely and too well with the governing party, then that party is seen as being effective and being able to work effectively across the aisle and get things done. But if you obstruct that party, then when the next election is nearing, you get to say, look, they're ineffectual. They can't work well with others. So there would always be this sort of tension, but I hoped that given the exigencies of the circumstances, that these considerations would be tempered by the existential need to actually be Canada first, which, by the way, was part of why I was optimistic about whomever would win. I felt that given the moment Canada was in, whoever won would have to be Canada first. They would have to be less partisan, and they would have to be less corrupt and self-serving than usual. The circumstances simply demanded it. And just as Pierre was gracious in his concession speech, Carney was gracious by immediately declaring that he would call a special election promptly to enable Pierre to get back into office. No tricks, no games, good faith. Unfortunately, since then, the sense I have is that the Canadian Conservative Party, Pierre Poilievre, and the most prominent Canadian Conservative YouTubers, such as Northern Perspective, whom I was actually a paying subscriber to, Moose on the Loose, and the Pleb Reporter, who is probably only about 2 IQ points north of actually being functionally retarded, have been nothing short of shameless partisan hacks who would rather Canada lose under Carney than win just so that their team can get into office that much sooner and they can say, told you so. It's absolutely pathetic, and it's anything but Canada first. Having said that, I will give Pierre his flowers for abstaining from slinging arrows at Carney in his recent appearance on Joe Rogan and in his speech in New York City. It reflected well on him and well on Canada. I appreciated it, and I hope to see more of it. So kudos to that, and please keep it going. But if you are a Canadian conservative or moderate who follows the sorts of commentary outlets I just mentioned, ask yourself this. Isn't it weird that while Carney is simultaneously probably the single most admired head of state on the planet today, your commentators can scarcely find a single kind word to say about him or anything that he's done? Carney has inspired governments and people around the world to increasingly unite against Trump's America. He has spearheaded greatly improved relations with India and China. And before I continue, I know some people will say, hey, didn't he say that China was the #1 threat to Canada like a year ago? Yes, he did. And would any of us say now that it is not the case, that the U.S. is an even bigger threat? That's point number one. I like the way he bullet points his commentary, and so maybe I'll steal that from him a little bit here. That's point one. Point number two, what is a better option? To be 75% or so dependent on exporting to your #1 threat, or to lower that level of dependence in exchange for a higher level of trade dependence on maybe your second biggest threat, thereby not depending on either one of them so much as to make them have too much bullying power over you? Is that not better? He has also expanded and deepened trade and defense relationships with the UK, the EU, Indonesia, Mexico, Australia, and much, much more. He has done so many things that we, i.e. Pierre Poilievre supporters, have claimed to have wanted and that Pierre himself campaigned on. He has reduced immigration levels, he has removed interprovincial trade barriers, he has sped up major national projects, he's made a modest cut to federal income taxes, increased GST tax rebates and credits, removed GST from first-time home buyers of homes up to roughly $1 million, maybe a little more than that, which is like exactly what Pierre was campaigning on, like to a T. He scrapped the consumer side of the carbon tax, has been working with Alberta on oil pipeline and LNG developments so well that even Danielle Smith has credited him for it. And he's increased Canada's defense spending massively. These are all things that Pierre's supporters wanted. Take the win. What is more, he has stalwartly avoided making a deal with Trump just to make a deal. Literally, every country that has made a deal with Trump is significantly worse off now than they were before Trump took office. All of them. As Carney has said, no deal is better than a bad deal. But that hasn't stopped Pierre and Canada's YouTube conservatives from criticizing Carney for not making a deal. But of course, had he made a deal, then they would have criticized him for making a bad deal. Carney simply cannot win with these people. They will never, under any circumstances, let him have a single good day. When Carney is admired by politicians, governments, and people around the world, when his polls in Canada continue to rise, when 5 members of parliament, 4 of whom being conservatives, including some of which having safe seats, and that's just for now, who knows how high that number will get, when they have already joined Mark Carney, when Canada's stock market just finished 2025 as the fastest growing stock market in the world among large economies, the US, by the way, was only 8th, when all of this is more is happening, and the political commentators that you are following can't say a single nice thing about him, the problem is not Mark Carney. The problem is the partisan hacks you're listening to. And I listened to them too for a long time. As such, I have little doubt that my views on the previous Liberal government and Trudeau are probably too charcoal-colored, because the sources I was following have shown that they will never, under any circumstances, say anything good about any Liberal unless they're defecting from the party. They will just never give them credit for anything. None of this helps Canada. None of this helps you. I'm not saying that you should become a Liberal. I'm saying that you should demand more of your Conservatives. Here's the last reason I think Canada is absolutely lucky to have Mark Carney. In a time of division, Carney is a pragmatic, non-ideological moderate. Have you seen him lean into identity politics or wokeness? I sure haven't, and that's a good thing. Canadians need to be unified, and him steering clear of these sorts of issues is a very good thing. Of course, Pierre is still leaning into them, still invoking woke as if it was 2023, whereas Carney is acting in a way that cultivates unity and building toward a better tomorrow. Pierre seems to be insistent upon stoking division and trying to keep us in a pre-2025 culture war mindset. Wokeness has been substantially superseded by bigger, more pressing issues. Take the win. We have bigger fish to fry, and we need all hands on deck, and that means Canadian Conservatives too. I know you'd rather have a Conservative in office, but if you're going to have a Liberal in office, honestly, you are not going to do better than Mark Carney.